You're lying on a table. The room smells like sweat and old wood. A man in a coat that hasn't been washed in weeks rolls up his sleeves, wipes his hands on his apron, the same apron he wore for the last surgery, and the one before that, and the one before that, picks up a knife and starts cutting into you. You are fully conscious. Anesthesia won't be standard for another few decades. The knife is not sterilized because the concept of sterilization does not exist yet, and the surgeon's hands are covered in dried biological material from the last 3 patients, 2 of whom are already dead. This is not a horror movie. This is a hospital in 1847 in Vienna, one of the most advanced medical cities on Earth. And if you survive the surgery itself, there is roughly a 1 in 5 chance you will die anyway, from a fever that no one can explain, that no one can treat, and that the entire medical establishment has decided is simply the cost of doing business. The man who figured out why was ignored, ridiculed, fired, and eventually committed to an asylum. His crime was telling doctors to wash their hands. The Vienna General Hospital in the 1840s was one of the largest medical institutions in Europe. It had 2 maternity clinics, the first clinic and the second clinic, and they were essentially identical in every way except one. In the first clinic, the death rate for new mothers was between 10 and 30%. In the second clinic, it was around 2%. Same hospital, same building, same city, same year. One ward killed women at 5 to 15 times the rate of the other. Everyone knew about this. The women knew about it. Expectant mothers in Vienna would beg on their knees not to be admitted to the first clinic. Some preferred to give birth in the street rather than be sent there. And here's the part that should make you genuinely angry. The doctors had no idea why one clinic was so much more dangerous than the other, and most of them were not particularly bothered by the question. The leading theories were poetic: bad air, emotional distress, cosmic influences. One prominent physician suggested that the women in the first clinic were dying because they felt embarrassed being examined by male students. The second clinic used midwives, embarrassment, as a cause of death. That was a real medical opinion held by credentialed professionals in the most sophisticated medical system on the continent. A Hungarian obstetrician named Ignaz Semmelweis arrived at the Vienna General Hospital in 1846 and did something almost nobody else had done. He looked at the numbers, not the theories, not the traditions, the numbers. He noticed that the first clinic, the deadly one, was staffed by doctors and medical students. The second clinic was staffed by midwives. Same patients, same procedures, same conditions. The only consistent difference was who was touching the women. Then his friend Jakob Kolechka died. Kolechka was a pathologist who nicked his finger during an autopsy. He developed a fever. The fever killed him. And when they performed Kolechka's own autopsy, the internal damage looked identical to the women dying of childbed fever in the first clinic. Semmelweis made the connection that should have been obvious. The doctors were performing autopsies on dead bodies in the morning, then walking directly to the maternity ward to deliver babies in the afternoon. They didn't wash their hands in between, not because they were lazy, because nobody thought there was a reason to. They were carrying death on their fingers, literally, from the morgue to the delivery room, patient after patient, day after day. Semmelweis called it cadaverous particles. He didn't have germ theory. Louis Pasteur was still years away from publishing his work, but he didn't need a theory. He had a hypothesis, and he had a solution. He ordered every doctor in the first clinic to wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution before touching a patient. The results were immediate and overwhelming. The death rate in the first clinic dropped from over 12% to under 2% in a matter of months. In some months, it hit 0. The same ward that had been killing women at catastrophic rates was now as safe as the midwife clinic next door. Nothing else had changed. Same building, same patients, same procedures. The only difference was a basin of chlorinated water and a rule that said, use it. This should have been one of the great triumphs in the history of medicine. A doctor identifies the cause of thousands of deaths, implements a cheap and simple solution, and the death rate collapses. That is the kind of discovery that gets statues built and lectures named after you. That is not what happened. Here's where the story gets dark. Darker than the dead patients, darker than the unwashed hands. The Viennese medical establishment rejected Semmelweis, not quietly, loudly, publicly, and with visible contempt. His superior, Johann Klein, was openly hostile. Other leading physicians dismissed the chlorine washing as unnecessary, unscientific, and frankly, insulting. The suggestion that doctors were killing their own patients, that the most educated, most respected professionals in the building were the source of the contamination, was treated not as a medical finding, but as a personal attack. Think about what was actually being asked of them. Semmelweis wasn't just saying, wash your hands. He was saying, you have been killing women for years, and the thing you need to change is yourself. That is a different ask. That is the kind of statement that turns an entire professional class against you, not because the evidence is weak, but because the implication is unbearable. Some doctors explicitly refused to wash. The idea that a gentleman's hands could carry disease was considered absurd. A gentleman's hands were clean by definition. One physician reportedly said that the suggestion was offensive to his honor as a professional. Women kept dying. Semmelweis's contract at the Vienna General Hospital was not renewed. He returned to Hungary, where he implemented hand-washing protocols at a hospital in Budapest, and again saw death rates plummet. Again, the broader medical establishment ignored the results. He grew increasingly frustrated, then angry, then erratic. He wrote open letters to prominent obstetricians, calling them irresponsible murderers. He was not wrong, but he was not diplomatic about it either. His behavior deteriorated. In 1865, colleagues arranged for him to be committed to an asylum. He died there 2 weeks later at the age of 47. The official cause was listed as a beating by guards. Some historians believe he was already suffering from an infection, possibly contracted from the same kind of wound that killed his friend Kolitschka years earlier. The man who proved that hand-washing saves lives may have died from a wound that went unwashed. It took another 20 years. Louis Pasteur published germ theory. Joseph Lister pioneered antiseptic surgery. Robert Koch identified the specific bacteria that cause specific diseases, and piece by piece, the medical world accepted what Semmelweis had demonstrated with a basin of chlorine and a set of mortality statistics decades earlier. Today, hand washing is so fundamental to medicine that it barely registers as a practice. It's like reminding a pilot to use the runway. But for most of human history, the idea that invisible particles on a doctor's hands could kill a patient was considered laughable. Not unproven, laughable. The distinction matters because people don't reject ideas they find merely unproven. They reject ideas that threaten the story they've built about themselves. So tomorrow morning, when you wash your hands before breakfast, not because you've been touching cadavers, but because it's just what you do, consider that this instinct, this basic, automatic, utterly ordinary behavior, had to be invented, proven, rejected, proven again, and fought for by a man who died in an asylum because the people around him preferred their own pride to their patients' lives. That's not ancient history. That was 160 years ago. Some of the doctors who refused to wash their hands lived long enough to see antibiotics. Clean hands? That was the whole fight. And it almost didn't happen.